essentially this session I'm going to talk at an incredibly high level about deploying an application into Azure. There are so many ways to do this that I couldn't possibly hope to cover them in 45 minutes. This is going to be a bit of a steep, might happen in the time, might not happen in the time kind of session, so we might go at a bit of a pace. Apologies if you don't quite get through it all in the time. I can help you out, and we can keep the relevant resources open for a week or so just to give people the chance to experiment with them and go through the content in your own time if you don't manage to do it in the 45 minutes. So as per for those who haven't, who were, I think it's just you, Mohammed, actually, who wasn't in the previous sessions. Here's the steps you need to have done previously. So you need to basically get the tools, which hopefully you saw from a Slack message earlier, and then the CLI should look like that. Check your inbox, that was the email I was referring to, it'll look like that. Accept the invitation. If you've not got that, give me a shout, I can resend it. And then if you log into Azure in terms of the backend, so you go portal.azure.com, and then switch over from the relevant, you probably go into Answer Digital's directory by default. If you switch over into the Answer AI one, using those steps there, switch directory, then switch there, you should get into there. You should see something similar to this if you type resource and then select resource groups, or maybe it might even be on your default screen actually. You should hopefully see a resource group with your name in it. I've auto-generated that, as I said in the previous session, with OpenTofu. So that's created. So here's the steps that we had before, which was setting up state. So if you log into the, if you CD into the create state folder, and you need to make sure you're logged in with the right tenant in the Azure CLI, there's a command in the Slack group for how to do that. If you navigate into the create state folder and then run tofu init, then tofu plan, it will create a storage container for your remote state. Then if you go into the main.tf file within the source folder and change the content to your correct resource group name, as well as the randomly generated storage account name, then it will know within the provider file, it will then know how to create or reference the remote state. If you have any problems with that, give me a shout. But yeah, that's a very, very big old whistle-stop tour of what we did in the last session. Okay, so deploying apps on Azure. As I said, there are a lot of ways, and this is by no means an exhaustive list of deploying apps in Azure. Depends entirely on the type of app that you're building. So you might have something like a noddy front-end brochureware, like static site that doesn't connect to anything. It's just like a simple spa or just a statically generated set of HTML and CSS and JavaScript, which might be used like the Answer website, for instance, is a static site. So you might find that you can deploy such an application in Azure Static Web Apps. Essentially, that goes into a storage account. So like you might be able to do in AWS, where you deploy essentially a static website into an S3 bucket. The exact same functionality is possible in Azure through a storage account in a container, and you can basically say, enable this storage account as a static website, and then you can give it all the DNS and all that kind of jazz. But fundamentally, it's about as simple a deployment as you can possibly do for a static website. Logic apps are a sort of a low to no code option for, based on events, do various actions. They can be defined in code. They're not typically things that we touch that much here at Answer, because we tend to write our applications rather than do drag and drop operations for chaining things together. So we tend to do things in code. So the last couple of things are the things that we're more likely to be using when we're working in Azure with our clients. And those are Azure Functions apps. So that is basically your serverless option when it comes to Azure. So yeah, you might have used Service Apps over in AWS, but with Lambdas, Functions apps are basically the Azure equivalent of Lambdas. So you can have one-time bit of code that gets executed, and then that will execute as a function, and then it goes back to sleep. It's basically, the theory is it's super cheap, but yeah, questions remain as to whether or not the cheapness of that actually comes to pass, but yeah, that is what it is. Azure App Service is the sort of bread and butter resource that we use for deploying a standard web application into Azure. This is what we're going to attempt to get set up in this session. So hopefully, if everything that I've done in the last 24 hours works, which I did test it, but hopefully it will work, is we'll need to set up an Azure App Service, and then I've created another template repository for those who are in the previous session. You should all be able to access in the Answer Digital GitHub organization. There is some template repositories. So there's another repo for you to fork in this example, which is a highly exciting Hello World application that was absolutely not created with the .NET CLI this morning. What that will do is essentially, as it sounds, basically give you the classic Hello World. Well, it's actually evolved over the time, but the .NET application, and what we need to do, and the challenge, is to create yourself a Linux app service. Now, I'll send round these links so you can actually click on them, because otherwise it'd be a bit tedious. Yeah, essentially you need to look up Linux web app in the Azure RM documentation. And what that will have you create, for those of you who've got as far as creating a virtual network within your resource group, you'll need to create some new resources. One will be a app service plan. Please use the free tier. There's a hint. Otherwise, I'll have to destroy some things pretty sharpish when I get told off on Monday that someone spent hundreds of pounds. There'll be the app service plan that you'll need to create, and then a Linux web app that refers to that app service plan. So 2 resource blocks. Only bother filling in the absolute required details. So I'll send around the link, and then we'll see how we get on. But the step 1 is let's all try and create an app service within our resource group. If at the very least in this session we get to the point where someone can access a randomly generated URL which looks like you need to deploy your code, but it's got like an Azure logo and all that stuff. If we get to that point, I'll be chuffed, because you've at least run some OpenTofu to actually create that. But I guess Billy bonus of this session is we want to actually hook this up with GitHub Actions to deploy to it. Now, in the Hello World sample app that I've created, there is already the bare bones GitHub action, so you're not having to write a GitHub action from scratch for actually deploying to this app service. Again, like the previous things, you need to set some things up. Now, in the repo in question, I've actually documented with the changes you need to make. That's not the right one. Let me open it up. This is very much the contents of the .NET New React to create a React template. And unbeknownst to me, actually, I don't know if anyone knows why this is, but when I created it, it seemed to pick the lowest common denominator for .NET Framework version or .NET Core version, which I thought was a very odd choice. So I was scratching my head going, why is this app not running? And it's like, well, because .NET 7's not available on this app service. And I was like, why has it done that? Anyway, because I have .NET 7, 8 and 9 installed, and it chose 7 for some reason. Don't know why. Anyway, these are, so when you've created your fork of this application, you'll need to create some repository secrets. Now, how you need to do that is you need to locate your service principal. Now, service principal in Azure speak is essentially an unintended user to access things and to do things. So as far as GitHub is concerned, this is just a method of logging in to Azure. So we use service principals in CI/CD all the time to avoid actually using user accounts, because we've got lots of fun like MFA that you've all been experiencing in the last session, which makes life very difficult for CI/CD agents because it basically doesn't work. So service principals are basically a running something in the background kind of thing. And so the service principal, again with the repo that I use to create all of your accounts, you should already have a service principal under your name. So, and because I also gave you the rights to actually access applications, if you type in, if you go into the Azure portal, assuming you are, sorry, come on, move over. If you go into the Azure portal and type in Entra in the top bar, you should be taken to Answer AI as an overview. And if you scroll down and go into app registrations, and then click all applications, you should see a whole list of service principals with everybody's name in. Pick yours, please, so you don't confuse some poor individual who's wondering why their client secret's not working anymore. But if you pick yours, and then what you need to do to create a client secret, sorry Matt, I already used yours as a test bed, but I'll delete this. Well, feel free to delete it yourself, but essentially, do you know what, I'll delete it and then show the creation of it, and then I'm sure Matt's all over being able to recreate one of these. So if you go to, when you're in your service principal, go to certificates and secrets, client secrets, new client secret, give it some kind of noddy name, secret, and accept the default thing. You can only see this value at this point, so copy it. What I would say is, yes, I'm firing a lot of information at you. Please could you start by trying to create the Linux web app? So let me send you the link to that, because that will need to be, it takes a minute or two to create the service plan, to create the application itself, and you're going to need that to actually deploy to it. So let me send you did I send the link round already? If not, apologies. The link that you will all need to get going, assuming you've got to the point where you can create a tofu plan and apply within the source folder of the repo that you previously created. Here is a link for the, I'll just send it in the OpenTofu sessions thing. That is the documentation for creating a Linux web app. So if I just open this up, you will see the resource group. You will need to use a data reference to reference an existing resource group, because as we learned before, that already exists. But in this example, you've got an app service plan, and that is a really simple one there. And yes, we do want the OS type of Linux. It's cheaper, it doesn't have to have a Windows license embedded in it. And we do want to change that SKU name. SKU name is basically the tier of service plan that by default cheekily is a premium one. Please don't use that. It should list, if we look up in the argument reference for app service plan, which annoyingly won't be on this page, but if you copy that into there, you will find app service plan as a secondary resource type over there. And then you can see probably all of the examples that are in there, so you can see the different values. And we will probably want a SKU, and SKU block is, where is that? I think it's F0 that you want for the size, but yeah, if you get stuck with that, that basically stands for free 0. It's shared memory, and it's basically as cheap as chips. But yeah, you'll want an app service plan, and then subsequently you will also want a Linux web app that references that app service plan. So yeah, try and create something along those lines and give it a name. You will need that name later. That name is the basis for which it generates the site's actual web URL. It actually, annoyingly, it used to be that it used to be fully formed, but in that sense. But I guess every man and his dog is deploying to app services these days, so they now append an auto-generated character series after your name. So you'll need to go into the portal to determine what the URL it is that it's actually been hosted on. Topic for another day, but you can actually absolutely get that sort of information out of attributes. So when you've created resources, you can output variables. That's probably the 201 session that this isn't, but essentially you could determine what is the default host name, for instance, of your Linux web app that it's created, and that would be the way that you access that. By all means, look into the Tofu documentation in terms of language syntax to make yourself aware of that. Okay, so hopefully I've not bamboozled you guys too much, but if you try ahead and create a block, and then maybe those who are slightly more familiar, I'll start going around the room and see how you're getting on, but those who are slightly more familiar, maybe if you could help others as well, that'd be great. And then once we've got that, we should be in a position where we can hopefully deploy to it with the other repo. And as a little sidebar, I'm going to change all your permissions for those who previously didn't have permission to create a client secret. I'll just go ahead and change that now. So the example bit, part of a resource block. So if I just scroll up, it's a very, very long list of properties that are in there. So whenever you're creating a resource block in Tofu or Terraform, this first part denotes the provider, which is who is responsible for actually creating this. So Azure RM is the name of the provider, then the resource type. It's all convention based, so that's how it knows what provider to look at. This is the name that you give it. So this happens to be an example that they've chosen. It is an example, but you can name that whatever you like within reason. I think special characters and funny things like that aren't allowed. I think you're allowed to use just alphanumeric characters and underscores or hyphens, I think. I tend to like to use underscores because it means when you're selecting a value to reference in another block, you don't select half the name constantly because it's split up by hyphens. Use underscores and you get the whole string at once, just a preference thing. But yeah, so in this example, the service plan would be called example, but when you come to reference the ID, then it would be the resource type, which is that one, including the provider, and then .name .id that it's after. So that's the service plan ID, and it's wanting the ID of that. So what that's doing is it's referring to an attribute that is generated as part of this being generated. So this, we don't know the ID of this at the point of it being generated. So what OpenTofu does behind the scene, which is really neat, and it knows that this Linux web app is dependent on the service plan. So it will create the service plan first and say, right, okay, now I know the ID because it's finished generating it, I can start generating the Linux web app that refers to it, at which point it will then go ahead and create it. So it will also know really sensible things, like if you comment out this block subsequently, the service plan block, to destroy it or delete it off the file or something like that, and something's referring to it, then it's going to say, no, you can't do that. Whereas if you were to, I don't know, copy and paste the string of the service plan ID that you generated, if you generated it in 2 steps, then Tofu wouldn't know that there was a reference there. So that's why you use actual proper attribute references throughout your Tofu code, so that it knows all the interrelationships and it knows what order to build things in, and all that's handled for you. There are other things that you might need to do, like in some exceptional circumstances, you can actually use a special attribute on any resource block, which is called depends_on, and then it takes an array of resources. So you can basically just pass an array of resources. So it will then say, okay, for whatever reason that Tofu can't automatically work out, this thing needs to get created first before I then go ahead and create the things that depend on it. So that's it's a topic for another day. But right, so when you create the client secret, just to reiterate, it only shows it once. Once you navigate off that page, it's gone and you can't get at it, so you'd have to delete it and recreate it. But yeah, just to remind how to do that. So if we go to Entra, okay, and we go to app registrations, all applications, find you, and I'll use Jake as a guinea pig, and then go to add a certificate or secret, and then you should hopefully see this button, which should hopefully give you permissions to do this, and you say, right, secret, and hit add, and then you copy that value, the value one, not the secret ID, the value is the one that you want. Okay, right. I'm going to pop round now and see how people are getting on with creating a app service and a Linux with an app service plan and a Linux web app, and see how you're getting on. So for the recording's sake, always on should be set to false for the free plan. So you will find that the examples that they give tend to lean towards premium features, and so you sometimes have to tweak their examples to get the free stuff working properly and turn things off for that to work. So yeah, thanks for that. Okay, right, so we're a bit over time, so what I'm going to say is we'll go ahead and try and get a bit further along, but I've got the next session I'm doing is on networking, which doesn't require quite so many things to be created to mess around with it. But by all means keep on trying to get this bit going, because I think it would be fun to actually deploy to the web app in question after you've been able to deploy it in the first place. But yeah, I think we'll take a break there and then we'll resume with session 3 for those who are taking part. Thank you for coming on to this one as well. All right. Cheers. Yes.